there are some words you never forget. Not because they were shouted or screamed, but because they were said with such casual cruelty that they carved themselves into your heart like initials on a tree trunk. Permanent, deep, impossible to ignore. "I wish you weren't my mother." My son said that to me on a Tuesday afternoon in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made his breakfast every morning for 32 years. The same kitchen where I'd packed his school lunches with notes tucked inside that said, "You're going to do great today, and Mom loves you." The same kitchen where I'd stood at the stove, exhausted from double shifts, cooking his favorite meals because seeing him smile made every aching muscle worth it. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. "My name is Marlene, and I'm 73 years old. I've been told I look older now. Grief has a way of aging you faster than time ever could, but I remember when I was young and strong, when my hands didn't shake and my back didn't ache with every movement. I remember when I believed that love was enough, that if you gave everything you had to your children, they would grow up to be good people who valued what you'd sacrificed. I was wrong, eh?" If you're listening to this and you've ever been betrayed by someone you would have died for, if you've ever given everything and been told it wasn't enough, if you've ever loved so hard it broke you, then you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. And if you like stories that dig deep into the heart, stories that matter, please subscribe to this channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us keep sharing these stories. Comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I read every single one. The day it all fell apart started like any other day in my small, quiet life. I woke up at 6 in the morning, made myself tea, and sat at my kitchen table with the envelope I'd been keeping in my dresser drawer. Inside that envelope was $3,200, every penny I'd managed to save over the past 2 years. $3,200 doesn't sound like much, does it? To some people, that's a weekend vacation or a nice piece of furniture. But to me, it represented something far more valuable: hope. Hope that I could finally get the surgery my doctor had been recommending for 18 months. Hope that the constant pain in my hip would stop making every step feel like walking on broken glass. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could have a few good years left where I wasn't always hurting. I'd save that money $5 at a time, $10 at a time. Every time I got my Social Security check, I'd take a little bit and hide it away before paying my bills. I'd skip meals sometimes to make the grocery money stretch further. I'd keep the heat low in winter and wear extra sweaters. I'd walk to the pharmacy instead of taking the bus, even when my hip screamed in protest, just to save $2. My son David knew about that money. I'd told him about it 6 months earlier, my voice full of pride as I explained that I was finally close to my goal. "Just a few more months, honey, and I'll be able to schedule the surgery. The doctor says it'll change my life. I'll be able to walk without pain again, maybe even go to the park like I used to." David had smiled at me that day. He'd hugged me and said, "That's great, Mom. You deserve it." And I'd believed him. God help me. I'd believed every word. That Tuesday morning, I opened the envelope to add another $15 I'd managed to save from my medication budget. I'd found a generic version that was cheaper, and my heart stopped. The envelope was empty. Completely empty. Not a single bill remained. At first, I thought I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd moved the money and forgotten where I put it. I'm old, and sometimes my memory isn't what it used to be. I searched my dresser, pulling out every drawer, checking between my folded nightgowns and underneath my winter scarves. Nothing. I looked in my closet, in my bathroom cabinet, under my mattress. Nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on my bed. $3,200. Gone. 2 years of sacrifice, of going without, of dreaming about the day I could finally stop hurting. Gone. David still had a key to my apartment. He was my only child, my only family in this city. Of course he had a key. What if I fell? What if I needed help? What if there was an emergency? A mother gives her son a key because that's what mothers do. That's what trust looks like. I called him. My fingers fumbled with my phone, one of those old ones with the big buttons because I can't see the small screens very well anymore, and I waited while it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Mom? His voice sounded irritated, like I'd interrupted something important. David, honey, I need to ask you something. I tried to keep my voice calm, tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. The money I've been saving for my surgery, it's gone. Did you need to borrow it? Because if you needed help, you could have just asked me. Even then, even with my life savings missing, I was trying to make it easier for him. I was giving him an out, a way to explain without feeling ashamed. That's what mothers do. We protect our children from their own mistakes. We cushion their falls. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long, heavy pause that made my stomach turn. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said. The $3,000, David, from my dresser. It was in an envelope and now it's gone. You're the only other person who has a key. Another pause. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable laugh. A genuine laugh, like I'd said something absurd. Mom, I think you're confused. You probably spent it and forgot. You know how you get sometimes. How I get sometimes. As if I were a child who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. As if 73 years of life, of raising him alone after his father left, of working 2 jobs to put food on our table, of sacrificing everything so he could have a better life than I did. As if all of that meant nothing because I was old now and sometimes forgot where I put my reading glasses. I didn't spend it, David. I've been saving every penny for 2 years. You know that. Please, if you needed the money, just tell me. We can figure something out. I just need to know what happened. Jesus, Mom. His voice turned sharp now, angry. I didn't take your money. Maybe you should check with that nurse who comes by sometimes, or the mailman, or whoever else you let into your apartment. But stop accusing me. I'm your son. I'm not accusing you, honey. I'm just trying to understand. No, you are accusing me. And you know what? I'm getting really tired of this. Every time something goes wrong in your life, you make it my problem. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. I can't keep dropping everything to deal with your paranoia. My paranoia. The word hit me like a slap. I'd raised this man. I'd held him when he cried, celebrated every achievement, forgiven every mistake. I'd worked myself to exhaustion so he could have new shoes for school, so he could go on field trips, so he could have birthday parties with cake and presents. I'd gone without so he would never have to. And now, I was paranoid. David, please. I'm not trying to upset you. I need that money. For my surgery. The pain is getting worse and... Then maybe you should have been more careful with it. Look, I have to go. I'll talk to you later. The line went dead. I sat there on my bed, holding my phone, staring at the blank screen. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were pressing in on me. Outside my window, I could hear children playing in the courtyard below, their laughter bright and careless. Life was continuing as normal for everyone else while mine was falling apart. I should have let it go. I should have accepted that the money was gone, that maybe I really had made some mistake I couldn't remember. I should have just resigned myself to living with the pain for a few more years, to saving all over again if my body held out that long. But something inside me wouldn't let it rest. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the clarity that sometimes comes with age, when you've seen enough of life to recognize patterns, to spot lies even when they're wrapped in family love. Or maybe it was just the simple, desperate need to understand how the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd loved more than my own life, could look me in the eye and lie. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was the last time my son would speak to me with even a pretense of respect. Everything that came after, the accusations, the isolation, the way people I'd known for decades would cross the street to avoid me, it all started with those words. I wish you weren't my mother. So he'd say them to my face 3 days later. And they would break something in me that I didn't know could be broken. But they would also, in some strange way I couldn't yet understand, begin to set me free. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the streetlight outside move across the plaster cracks I'd memorized over the years. My hip throbbed with that deep, persistent ache that never really went away anymore, just varied in intensity. Tonight it felt worse, as if my body knew that relief was further away than ever. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would go to the bank. Maybe there was some record, some explanation I hadn't considered. Maybe someone had accessed my account, though the money had been cash, hidden in my home, not deposited anywhere. Still, I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit in my apartment and accept that 2 years of hope had vanished. The walk to the bank took me 40 minutes. It should have taken 15, but every step sent pain shooting up my leg. I had to stop 3 times to rest, sitting on bus stop benches while younger people rushed past me, their faces buried in their phones, their lives full of places to be, and people who were waiting for them. The bank manager was a woman named Patricia, maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes and a patient smile. She listened to my story, nodding sympathetically as I explained about the missing money, about my son having a key, about how I just needed to understand what had happened. Mrs. Chen, she said gently. I'd kept my married name even after my husband left, mostly because changing it seemed like too much trouble. If the money was cash kept in your home, the bank wouldn't have any record of it. We only track funds that are deposited in accounts. I know, I said, feeling foolish. I just thought, maybe there was something. Anything. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming lightly on her desk. Then she said something that changed everything. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't be offended. Has anyone else had access to your banking information? Your PIN number? Your online login? I don't use online banking, I told her. I can barely work my phone. I come in here when I need something. But you have a debit card? Yes, but I only use it for groceries and my medications, and I always keep the receipts. Patricia's expression shifted, became more serious. Would you mind if I pulled up your recent transactions, just to make sure everything looks correct? I nodded, confused but willing. What did my debit card have to do with cash missing from my dresser? She turned her computer screen slightly so I could see it, and began scrolling through a list of transactions. Groceries at the store I always used, the pharmacy, my electric bill. Everything looked normal until she stopped scrolling. "Mrs. Chen, do you recognize these charges?" She pointed to 3 transactions, all from the same day, 2 weeks earlier. $200 withdrawn from an ATM across town, $300 withdrawn from another ATM an hour later, $450 withdrawn from a third ATM that same evening. "I didn't make those," I whispered. I was home all day that day. I remember because it was raining and my hip was bothering me. I didn't leave my apartment. Patricia's face had gone very still. "Mrs. Chen, I need to report this as potential fraud. These withdrawals, combined with your missing cash. This is a police matter now." "No," I said quickly, panic rising in my chest. "No, please. I just wanted to understand what happened. I don't want to involve the police." "I'm sorry, but the bank is required to report suspected fraud. It's not optional." Her voice was gentle but firm. "If someone stole your debit card information and made these withdrawals, that's a crime. And if that same person had access to your home—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I left the bank in a daze, Patricia's promise that "the police will contact you soon" echoing in my ears. What had I done? I'd only wanted answers. I hadn't wanted to start some official investigation. David was my son. Even if he'd taken the money and the evidence was starting to seem overwhelming, I didn't want him arrested. I didn't want him to have a criminal record. I just wanted him to admit what he'd done, to apologize, to maybe even return what he could. Mothers don't send their children to jail. That's not how it works. The police officer who came to my apartment 2 days later was young, maybe 30, with a serious expression and a notepad he kept referring to. His name was Officer Martinez, and he asked me to walk him through everything: the missing cash, the ATM withdrawals, who had access to my home, who had access to my debit card. "My son has a key," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "And my card. I keep it in my wallet, but I leave my wallet on the kitchen counter sometimes." "If someone came by when I was in the bathroom or taking a nap—" "What's your son's name?" "David. David Chen. But officer, I don't want to press charges. I just want my money back. Can't we just talk to him? Maybe this is all a misunderstanding." Officer Martinez looked at me with an expression I would come to recognize over the following weeks, pity mixed with professional detachment. "Mrs. Chen, the bank has already filed a fraud report. This isn't about what you want anymore." If a crime was committed, we're obligated to investigate. "I'll need to speak with your son." He asked for David's phone number and address. I gave them to him because what choice did I have? But my hands were shaking so badly I could barely write the numbers down. After Officer Martinez left, I called David. I needed to warn him, to explain that this had gotten out of my control, that I hadn't meant for the police to get involved. He didn't answer. I called 3 more times. Each call went to voicemail. Finally, I sent him a text message, something I rarely did because the small buttons on my phone made typing difficult. "David, please call me. The police want to talk to you about the money. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please call me. Love, Mom." He responded 6 hours later with a single sentence. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." The next morning, I heard the knock on my door that I'd been dreading. It was Officer Martinez again, but this time he wasn't alone. He had another officer with him, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. "Mrs. Chen, we spoke with your son," Officer Martinez said. "He's denying any involvement in the theft. He says he says you've been having memory problems, that you often forget things and become confused. He suggested that you might have spent the money yourself and forgotten about it." The words hit me like a physical blow. Memory problems. Confused. He was painting me as senile, as unreliable, as a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to remember her own actions. "I don't have memory problems," I said, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded weak, uncertain. "I mean, sometimes I forget small things, like where I put my glasses, but I wouldn't forget spending $3,000. The older officer spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Chen, your son also mentioned that you've accused him of things in the past, that you've been, how did he put it? Increasingly paranoid about people taking advantage of you." That was a lie. A complete lie. I'd never accused David of anything before this. But how could I prove that? How could I prove a negative? "He's lying," I said, and I hated how desperate I sounded. "He's lying to protect himself. Please check the ATM cameras. Check where those withdrawals were made. I was home all day. Someone can verify that." "We're looking into it," Officer Martinez assured me. "But I have to tell you, without physical evidence linking your son to the withdrawals, this becomes a difficult case. It's your word against his." After they left, I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. True, absolute helplessness. The kind of helplessness I'd felt when my husband walked out, leaving me with a 10-year-old son and no child support. The kind of helplessness I'd felt working 2 jobs and still barely making rent. But this was worse, because back then I'd had David. Back then I'd had someone to fight for, someone who needed me. Now, the person I'd fought for all those years was the one making me feel this way. The phone rang. It was my neighbor, Susan, from down the hall. We'd been friendly for years. She'd sometimes bring me soup when I was sick, and I'd watch her cat when she traveled. "Marlene," she said, her voice stiff and uncomfortable. "I just wanted you to know that David came by earlier. He was very upset. He said you're having him investigated by the police?" My stomach dropped. "Susan, it's not like that. Money was stolen from my apartment and—" "He said you've been confused lately, that you've been forgetting things and making accusations. Marlene, I'm worried about you. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about whether you need some help." "You know, with managing things—" "I'm not confused," I said, but my voice cracked. "Susan, I'm not confused. David took my money. He stole from me." There was a long pause. "David wouldn't do that. He's such a good son. He's always talking about how much he worries about you." "Marlene, I think maybe the stress of getting older is affecting you more than you realize." She hung up shortly after, making an excuse about dinner in the oven. But I could hear it in her voice, the doubt, the pity, the subtle distancing that told me our friendship was over. Susan believed David. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? He was young, articulate, successful. I was old, alone, struggling. The whispers started after that. I'd see my neighbors in the hallway and they'd nod politely but hurry past. At the pharmacy, the cashier who usually chatted with me suddenly became all business. At my church, the small community church I'd attended for 20 years, People smiled but didn't meet my eyes. David had gotten to them first. I didn't know exactly what he'd told them, but I could imagine. Poor Mom. She's not doing well. She's getting paranoid, accusing me of terrible things. I'm so worried about her. Can you keep an eye on her for me? Let me know if she seems confused. He'd poisoned every relationship I had with the same systematic efficiency he'd used to steal my savings. A week later, I saw him. I was coming back from the corner store carrying a single bag of groceries: bread, eggs, canned soup, the cheapest things I could find, when his car pulled up beside me. My heart leaped. Finally, we would talk about this. Finally, he would explain. He rolled down his window but didn't get out of the car, just sat there in his nice car, wearing his nice clothes, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd accosted him on the street. "Mom, you need to drop this," he said. No greeting. No, "How are you feeling?" Just that cold, flat statement. "David, please. I just want to understand what happened. If you needed the money, if you were in some kind of trouble, I wish you weren't my mother." The words came out so casually, so matter-of-factly, that at first I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. The grocery bag slipped from my hand, eggs cracking as they hit the pavement. "What?" "You heard me. I wish you weren't my mother. My whole life, you've been this weight around my neck. Poor Marlene. Struggling Marlene. Sacrificing Marlene. Do you know how exhausting it is? How every success I have gets diminished because everyone feels sorry for me for having you as a mother?" Each word was a knife. Each sentence carved something away from me that I would never get back. "I gave you everything," I whispered. "Yeah, and you never let me forget it." Every guilt trip, every "I worked 2 jobs for you," every "I went without so you could have." "I'm tired of it, Mom. I'm tired of you." He drove away while I stood there on the sidewalk. 32 years of motherhood puddled around my feet with the broken eggs, seeping into the concrete, impossible to clean up or put back together. I don't remember walking back to my apartment. I don't remember climbing the stairs or unlocking my door. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting on my kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, wondering if it was possible to die from heartbreak, wondering if that might actually be a blessing. The church social on Sunday was where I learned exactly how thoroughly David had destroyed my reputation. I'd been going to New Hope Community Church for 20 years, every Sunday morning, every Wednesday prayer group, every potluck dinner and fundraiser and Christmas pageant. These people had prayed with me through my husband's abandonment, through my struggles to raise David alone, through every hardship life had thrown at me. I thought they knew me. I thought 2 decades of showing up, of being present, of being honest and kind, would count for something. I was wrong. I arrived at the usual time, carrying a casserole I'd made with the last of my grocery money. It was tradition. Everyone brought something to share after the service. I'd made this same dish dozens of times, always received compliments, always felt like I was contributing something valuable, even if I couldn't afford to donate much money to the collection plate. The moment I walked into the fellowship hall, the conversation stopped. Not all at once, but in a wave, like a stone dropped into still water. People glanced at me, then quickly looked away. The silence felt thick, oppressive. The kind of silence that screams louder than words ever could. Pastor Edwards approached me with his usual smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Marlene, how are you doing?" We've been concerned about you. Concerned. The word felt like a weapon disguised as care. I'm managing, Pastor. Thank you for asking. I held out my casserole. Where should I put this? He hesitated, just for a moment, but I caught it. Oh, actually, we might have enough food today. Why don't you hold on to that? Take it home with you. My casserole wasn't good enough anymore. The message was clear. I set it down on the table anyway, my hands trembling slightly, and found a seat in my usual spot near the back. But the women who normally sat around me, Martha, who I'd known since David was in elementary school, Joyce, who'd helped me learn to use a computer at the library, Carol, who'd driven me to doctor's appointments when my hip was too bad to walk, they all chose seats elsewhere. Not dramatically, not making a scene, just somewhere else. I sat alone in a room full of people I'd known for 20 years. The service was torture. Every hymn felt like a mockery. Amazing Grace, when I felt like grace had been revoked. What a friend we have in Jesus, when my friends had abandoned me. Pastor Edwards preached about forgiveness, about understanding, about how sometimes our minds can play tricks on us as we age, about how we need to be patient with our elderly congregation members who might be struggling with confusion. He wasn't looking at me when he said it. He didn't have to. After the service, I tried to help clean up like I always did. I reached for a stack of folding chairs, but Martha gently took them from my hands. Oh, Marlene, don't worry about it. We've got this. You should probably rest. I'm not tired, Martha. I'm happy to help. Still, maybe it's better if maybe you should head home. Get some rest. We'll take care of things here. Joyce appeared at my elbow, her voice low and careful, like she was speaking to a child or someone who might break at any moment. Marlene, David called Pastor Edwards last week. He's very worried about you. He said you've been having some difficulties, making accusations that aren't true, forgetting things. I haven't forgotten anything, I said, but my voice came out weak, defensive. Joyce, you've known me for 15 years. Have I ever seemed confused to you? Have I ever made up stories? She patted my arm with the kind of condescending sympathy reserved for people who aren't quite reliable anymore. Of course not, dear. But sometimes age affects us in ways we don't notice ourselves. David said the doctors think you might benefit from an evaluation. You know, just to make sure everything is okay upstairs. She tapped her temple with one finger, smiling gently, as if she were being kind instead of cruel. There's nothing wrong with me, I said, louder than I intended. Several people turned to look. David stole my money. He stole $3,000 from me and he's lying about it to cover his tracks. Why won't anyone believe me? The room had gone silent again. People were staring now, but not with concern, with embarrassment. Embarrassment for me, for my outburst, for my inability to recognize my own decline. Pastor Edwards moved toward me, his hand outstretched in a gesture of comfort that felt more like containment. Marlene, I think perhaps you're having a difficult day. Why don't I walk you to your car? I don't have a car. I walked here, like I do every Sunday. Then let me drive you home. I think that would be best. Best for whom? I wanted to ask. Best for me? Or best for everyone else who didn't want to deal with the crazy old woman disrupting their pleasant Sunday morning? I left my casserole on the table. No one would eat it. I knew that. It would sit there until the end of the day, and then someone would throw it away. probably relieved that they didn't have to pretend to accept it. The drive to my apartment took 5 minutes. Pastor Edwards didn't say much, just made gentle comments about the weather and how sometimes we all need rest. When we arrived, he walked me to my door like I might forget where I lived. "Marlene," he said as I unlocked my apartment, "have you considered that David might be right? That perhaps you're under more stress than you realize, and it's affecting your memory? There's no shame in it. We all get older. We all need help eventually." I looked at him, this man who'd counseled me through my darkest times, who'd told me God had a plan, who'd preached about truth and justice and standing up for what's right. "Do you believe I'm lying?" I asked him directly. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. "I believe you believe what you're saying," he said carefully. "And I believe David loves you and is worried about you. Perhaps the truth is somewhere in the middle. Perhaps you're both struggling in different ways." The middle. As if theft could be a matter of perspective. As if there was a middle ground between stealing someone's surgery money and not stealing it. After he left, I stood in my apartment and looked at the phone. I wanted to call someone, anyone who might believe me. But who? Susan, my neighbor, thought I was confused. Martha and Joyce and Carol thought I was declining. Pastor Edwards thought I needed professional help. David had systematically convinced everyone in my life that I couldn't be trusted to understand my own reality. I thought about my brother, Thomas. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. A stupid argument about something I couldn't even remember now. The kind of grudge that feels justified at the time but becomes meaningless as years pass. He lived 3 hours away, had his own family, his own problems. We'd grown apart the way siblings sometimes do, not through any great betrayal, but through simple distance and time. But Thomas had never liked David. I remembered that now. There'd been some incident when David was in his 20s, something about borrowed money that was never returned. Thomas had said something back then that I'd dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. "Your son knows how to work people, Marlene. He knows exactly what to say and how to say it." I'd defended David then. Told Thomas he was being unfair, that David was just young and still figuring things out. The argument had escalated, and we'd stopped talking. 5 years of silence because I'd chosen my son over my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me now. The days began to blur together after that. I stopped going to church. What was the point? I stopped going to the corner store where the cashier now looked at me with pity. I ordered my groceries for delivery, the cheapest options, the bare minimum to survive, and stayed in my apartment where no one could look at me like I was losing my mind. Officer Martinez called twice more. They'd checked the ATM cameras, but the footage was grainy, and the person making the withdrawals had worn a baseball cap pulled low. Could be David. Could be someone else. No definitive proof. The investigation was ongoing, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. "Even if we could prove your son made the withdrawals," Officer Martinez told me during the last call, "he could claim you gave him permission to use your card. It becomes a he said, she said situation, especially given his claims about your memory issues." Memory issues. Those 2 words had become the weapon David used to destroy every attempt I made at justice. My hip got worse. The pain that had been manageable with over-the-counter medication became constant, sharp, stealing my sleep and my ability to think about anything else. I'd lie awake at night, trying to find a position that didn't hurt, knowing that the surgery that could fix it was further away than ever. I'd spent 2 years saving for hope, and now I was starting over from zero, if I even lived long enough to save that much again. The loneliness was worse than the pain. I'd spent my whole life surrounded by people, coworkers, church friends, neighbors, my son. Now my days were silent, except for the television I kept on for the illusion of company. I'd watch the news, watch cooking shows, watch anything that made me feel less alone. I started talking to myself. Not in a confused way. I knew exactly what I was doing, but I needed to hear a voice, even if it was my own. Okay, Marlene, time for lunch. Let's see what we have. Soup again. That's fine. Soup is good. It was pathetic, I knew, but no one was there to judge me for it. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the confrontation with David, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, when I made a decision. My hand shook as I scrolled through my contacts. Such a short list now, most of the names belonging to people who'd made it clear they didn't want to hear from me. I found Thomas's number. My thumb hovered over it for a long time. What would I even say? Hi, it's your sister who chose her son over you 5 years ago, and it turns out you were right about him, and now I'm alone and no one believes me and I don't know what to do. But I had nowhere else to turn, no one else who might listen. And something Claire, that nurse from the hospital, had said to me months ago when I'd gone in for a checkup on my hip, kept echoing in my mind. Sometimes the people who've been hurt the same way you have are the only ones who can truly understand. Thomas had been hurt by David. Maybe, just maybe, he would understand what I was going through now. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, convinced this was a mistake, when I heard his voice. Hello? Thomas? My voice cracked on his name. It's Marlene, your sister. There was a long pause, so long I thought he might hang up. I know who you are, Marlene, he said finally. His voice was careful, neutral. This is unexpected. I know we haven't talked. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But Thomas, I need help. I need someone who might believe me. And I think maybe you're the only person who will. Another pause. Then quietly, what did David do? Not, what do you need? Not, what's wrong? Just, what did David do? Because Thomas already knew. He'd always known. And as I began to tell him everything, the missing money, the accusations of confusion, the systematic way David had turned everyone against me, I heard something in my brother's voice that I hadn't heard from anyone else in weeks. I heard him believe me. Thomas listened without interrupting. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, steady and calm, while I poured out everything. The missing money, David's cold dismissal, the police investigation that went nowhere, the way everyone I knew had turned against me. When I finally finished, my throat raw from talking and from holding back tears, there was a long silence. Marlene, he said finally, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. What David did to you? He did to me too. 7 years ago. My breath caught. What do you mean? Remember when I was starting my business? The automotive repair shop? I told you I'd saved up the capital, had investors lined up. What I didn't tell you was that I'd borrowed $15,000 from David. He said he wanted to help, that he believed in me, that families should support each other. He made me feel like refusing the loan would be insulting him. I pressed my hand against my mouth, already knowing where this was going. 6 months later, when the business was finally starting to make money, he demanded the full amount back. Not in installments like we'd agreed, all of it, immediately. Said he had an emergency, needed it right away. When I told him I couldn't liquidate that much cash without destroying everything I'd built, he threatened to sue me. Said he'd tell everyone I'd stolen from him. Thomas, why didn't you tell me? I tried to, Marlene. I came to you, remember? That's what our argument was about. You thought I was making excuses for not paying him back, that I was being ungrateful. You told me David would never do something like that I must have misunderstood the terms. You chose to believe him over me. The memory came flooding back. Thomas showing up at my apartment, angry and hurt, trying to explain something about David and money and lies. And me, defending my son, refusing to hear a word against him. I'd called Thomas bitter, jealous of David's success. I'd told him to leave and not come back until he could be civil about my son. I'm sorry, I whispered. Thomas, I'm so sorry. I eventually paid him back. Had to take out a loan at a terrible interest rate, nearly lost the shop anyway. But you want to know the worst part? After I paid him, I found out there was no emergency. He used that money as a down payment on a new car. A luxury car he didn't need. He just wanted the money, and he knew exactly how to manipulate me into giving it to him. I felt sick. All these years, I'd thought Thomas was the unreasonable one. I'd dismissed his pain, his warnings, his attempt to show me who David really was. That's when I realized something about your son, Marlene. He's very good at reading people, at knowing exactly what buttons to push. With me, it was family loyalty and the shame of refusing help. With you, I'd guess it was guilt. All those years you sacrificed for him, how could you possibly accuse him of something so terrible? Am I right? He was right. That was exactly how I'd felt. How I still felt, even with all the evidence staring me in the face. The reason he's gotten away with this for so long, Thomas continued, is because he's smart enough to cover his tracks and charming enough to make people doubt themselves. And he always has a backup plan. With me, it was the threat of a lawsuit. With you, it's convincing everyone you're mentally declining. He's probably already set up his narrative so completely that even if you found proof, people would question its validity. So what do I do? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. How do I fight someone who's already convinced everyone I'm crazy? You don't fight him alone. That's what he wants. For you to be isolated, desperate, easy to dismiss. But I believe you, Marlene. And I'm going to help you prove what he did. Those words, I believe you, broke something open in me that had been sealed shut for weeks. I started crying, really crying, the kind of deep sobs that come from releasing pain you've been holding in because you had no one to share it with. I'm coming to see you this weekend, Thomas said. We're going to figure this out together. And Marlene, I need you to do something for me until then. What? Stop trying to convince people you're right. Stop defending yourself. Every time you do, you play into David's narrative that you're desperate and confused. Just be quiet for now. Let him think he's won. Can you do that? It went against every instinct I had. The need to make people understand, to clear my name, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But I trusted Thomas in a way I hadn't trusted anyone in weeks. I can do that, I said. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Not hope exactly. It was too fragile and uncertain to call hope, but maybe a possibility, a tiny crack in the wall that had been built around me. The days until Thomas's visit were the longest of my life. I did what he asked. I stayed quiet, stayed in my apartment, didn't try to contact anyone or defend myself. It was harder than I expected. Every time my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, part of me wanted to rush out and plead my case to whoever would listen. But I stayed quiet. My hip pain got worse. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed, the joint so stiff and painful that I had to hold onto furniture just to make it to the bathroom. I ran out of my pain medication and couldn't afford to refill it. The copay was $30, and I had $17 in my checking account until my next Social Security deposit. I ate one meal a day. Sometimes not even that. Soup, mostly, and crackers. I'd make a can last 2 days, heating up half at a time. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. My clothes hung looser on my frame, and my face in the bathroom mirror looked gaunt, aged, defeated. At night, I'd lie in bed and think about David. Not the man who'd stolen from me and called me crazy, but the little boy he'd been. The one who'd bring me dandelions from the yard, calling them flowers, his face so proud of his gift. The one who'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, trembling, and I'd hold him and tell him he was safe. The one who'd made me Mother's Day cards with his careful child handwriting. I love you, Mom. You are the best. Where had that boy gone? Or had he never really existed? Had I been so blinded by love, so desperate to see goodness in my son that I'd invented a person who was never there? That was the thought that kept me awake more than anything else. The possibility that I'd been wrong about him from the beginning. That all those years of sacrifice had been for someone who'd never appreciated them, never valued them, never saw them as anything but leverage to use against me when the time came. Friday afternoon, Thomas called. I'm leaving first thing tomorrow morning. Should be there by noon. Don't answer the door for anyone until I get there. Okay? Okay, I said. And then, because I needed him to know, Thomas, thank you. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not writing me off like everyone else. You're my sister, he said simply. I should have tried harder to stay in touch after our fight. I let pride get in the way. But I'm here now, and we're going to fix this. That night, I actually slept. Not well, and not for long, but for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares, without waking every hour convinced I'd heard someone breaking in. I slept because I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Saturday morning, I woke early and tried to make myself presentable. I showered, combed my hair, put on my nicest pair of slacks and a clean blouse. I wanted Thomas to see that I was okay, that I wasn't falling apart, that I was still the sister he remembered. But when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I'd aged years in the past few weeks. My face was drawn, my eyes sunken with dark circles beneath them. My hair, which I'd always kept neatly styled, looked thin and lifeless. I looked exactly like what David had accused me of being, a confused, declining old woman. The knock on my door came at 11:30. I looked through the peephole. Thomas, older than I remembered but unmistakably my brother. Tall, with the same gray eyes we'd both inherited from our father, wearing jeans and a jacket, holding a bag of groceries. I opened the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. 5 years of not speaking, of stubborn pride and hurt feelings, of choosing other people over the bond we'd had as children. "Hi, Marlene," he said softly. "Hi, Thomas." And then he pulled me into a hug, and I broke down completely. All the strength I'd been trying to maintain, all the dignity I'd been clinging to, all of it dissolved as I clung to my brother and sobbed into his shoulder. He didn't tell me to stop crying, didn't tell me everything would be okay. He just held me and let me cry, his hand patting my back the way it had when we were children, and I'd fallen off my bike or been teased at school. When I finally pulled away, embarrassed by my outburst, he was wiping his own eyes. "I brought groceries," he said, holding up the bags. "Real food, and we're going to sit down, eat something decent, and then we're going to make a plan." The groceries he'd brought weren't just basics. There was fresh fruit, vegetables, good bread, chicken, cheese, coffee, things I hadn't been able to afford in weeks. He unpacked them in my kitchen, talking casually about the drive up, about the weather, giving me time to compose myself. He made us lunch, sandwiches with real turkey and lettuce and tomatoes, with potato chips on the side and fresh strawberries for dessert. It was the best meal I'd had in weeks, maybe months. As we ate, Thomas pulled out a notebook and a pen. "Okay," he said. "Tell me everything again. Every detail you can remember. Dates, times, conversations, everything." So I did. I walked him through the whole story again, this time noting every specific he asked about. He wrote it all down, asked questions, made notes in the margins. "The ATM withdrawals," he said finally. "That's where we start. You said they couldn't identify David from the camera footage, but they could confirm it was a man, approximately his height and build?" "Yes. But he was wearing a cap pulled low, and the cameras weren't great quality." "What about the locations? Where were the ATMs?" "I had to check my bank statement, which I'd kept in a drawer, too afraid to throw it away. One was on Madison Street, one on Parker Avenue, and one on 5th and Commercial." Thomas pulled out his phone and started typing. After a moment, he looked up with something I hadn't seen in anyone's face in weeks. Not pity, not doubt, but anger. Righteous anger on my behalf. "Marlene," he said slowly, "all 3 of those ATMs are within 6 blocks of David's office building. He made those withdrawals during his lunch hour." It was such a small detail, such an obvious detail. But no one had thought to check. Or if they hadn't told me. "That's not proof," I said, because I'd learned not to get my hopes up. "Not by itself," Thomas agreed. "But it's a pattern. It's a starting point. And I'm willing to bet that if we dig deeper, we'll find more patterns. More evidence. David got sloppy because he thought you'd never fight back, that you'd either accept his story or collapse under the weight of everyone's doubt. He didn't count on you having someone in your corner." Thomas reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He didn't count on me," he said. "And that's going to be his biggest mistake." Thomas stayed the weekend, sleeping on my couch despite my protests that he should get a hotel room. I'm not leaving you alone right now, he said firmly. Besides, I've slept in worse places. Remember that camping trip Dad took us on when we were kids? When it rained all night and the tent leaked? I did remember. We'd huddled together in our sleeping bags, laughing at how miserable we were, making up stories to pass the time. It felt like a lifetime ago, back when the world seemed simpler, when family meant safety instead of betrayal. On Sunday morning, Thomas made us breakfast: real eggs, toast, coffee that didn't come from the cheapest container at the store. As we ate, he pulled out his notebook again. "I've been thinking," he said. "David's strategy relies on you being isolated and looking unstable. So here's what we're going to do. We're not going to chase him. We're not going to make accusations or demand anything. We're going to be quiet, methodical, and strategic. We're going to let him think he's safe while we build a case so solid that no one can dismiss it." "How?" The word came out more desperate than I intended. "First, we document everything. Every interaction you've had with David, every conversation with the police, every person who's been told you're confused. We create a timeline. Then we start gathering evidence, quietly. Bank records, ATM locations, security footage if we can get it. We find out what David needed that money for because people don't steal $3,000 for no reason." He paused, studying my face. "Marlene, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has David ever asked you for money before? Not stealing, asking?" I thought about it, my coffee growing cold in my hands. "Sometimes, over the years. Usually it was small amounts. 100 here, 200 there. He'd say it was for car repairs or an unexpected bill. I always gave it to him. He's my son. What was I supposed to do? Say no? Did he ever pay you back?" The question hit me harder than it should have. I tried to remember a single time David had returned money he'd borrowed. I couldn't. "No," I admitted quietly. "But I never asked him to. It was a gift, really. Mothers help their children." "Mothers help their children," Thomas repeated softly. And David knew that. He knew exactly how to frame every request so you'd feel guilty for even thinking about refusing. That's manipulation, Marlene. That's what he does. I wanted to argue, to defend David, but the words wouldn't come. Because Thomas was right. All those years I'd told myself I was being a good mother, being supportive and loving. But David had been training me, hadn't he? Training me to give without question, to never expect anything in return, to feel guilty for having boundaries. "There's something else," Thomas said, his voice careful. "I did some research last night. David works at Brennan Financial Group, right?" "Yes, he's been there for 8 years. He's very successful." I said it automatically, the same way I'd been saying it for years to anyone who asked about my son. "Marlene, Brennan Financial Group has been in the news recently. There was an internal audit 3 months ago. Several employees were investigated for improper handling of client accounts. No charges were filed, but 3 people were quietly let go." My heart started beating faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if David was under investigation at work, if he thought he might lose his job or face legal trouble, he'd need money quickly. He'd need cash that couldn't be traced, that couldn't be connected to his employment situation. And he'd need it from someone who wouldn't ask too many questions." "You think he stole from me because he was in trouble at work?" "I think it's possible. And if it's true, there will be a paper trail. These things always leave marks, even when people try to hide them." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But here's the thing. We can't go to his employer with accusations. Not yet. We need to be smarter than that. We need to find proof first, then present it in a way that can't be ignored or explained away. How do we get proof if the police couldn't find any? The police did a basic investigation and hit a wall. They're overworked, understaffed, and honestly, elder financial abuse cases often don't get the attention they deserve. But we have something they don't have. We know David. We know how he thinks. And we're not working 20 other cases at the same time. Thomas spent the rest of that day teaching me how to document everything. He showed me how to write down conversations immediately after they happened, including as many exact words as I could remember. He helped me organize my bank statements, highlighting every transaction I didn't recognize. He made copies of everything: the police report, the bank fraud filing, even the text messages between me and David. "This is your evidence file," he said, placing it all in a folder. "Keep it somewhere safe." "Not in an obvious place. David has a key to your apartment, remember? Somewhere he wouldn't think to look." I ended up hiding it in the bottom of my linen closet, inside a pillowcase, buried under extra blankets. It seemed ridiculous, hiding evidence from my own son like I was in a spy movie. But nothing about this situation was normal anymore. Before Thomas left Sunday evening, he hugged me tightly. "I'm going to make some calls this week." "I have a friend who used to work in financial investigation. I'll see what he can tell me about Brennan Financial Group. In the meantime, you keep documenting, keep quiet, and take care of yourself. Can you do that?" "I can try." "No, Marlene. You have to do more than try. You have to stay strong. Because David is going to notice that you've stopped trying to defend yourself, and he's going to wonder why." He might even reach out to check on you, to make sure you're still broken enough not to be a threat. When he does, I need you to be calm, collected, and completely normal. Can you do that? I thought about facing David again, hearing his voice, pretending everything was fine. The idea made my stomach turn, but I nodded anyway. "I can do that," I said, and this time I meant it. After Thomas left, the apartment felt emptier than it had before he arrived, but it was a different kind of empty. Before, it had been the emptiness of abandonment, of having no one. Now it was just the temporary absence of someone who would return, someone who cared, someone who believed me. I looked at the refrigerator full of food Thomas had bought, the fresh sheets he'd put on my bed, the living room he'd tidied while I'd taken a nap Saturday afternoon, the evidence folder hidden in my closet that proved I wasn't crazy, wasn't confused, wasn't making things up. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope yet. I was too battered for hope. But it was determination, a quiet, stubborn refusal to simply disappear the way David wanted me to. The week passed slowly. I followed Thomas's instructions, documented everything, stayed quiet, took care of myself as best I could. I forced myself to eat regular meals, even when my appetite was gone. I did gentle exercises to keep my hip from getting worse, even when the pain made me want to cry. And I waited. Wednesday evening, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But I remembered Thomas's words. Stay calm, collected, completely normal. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" "Mom." David's voice was different than the last time we'd spoken. Softer, almost concerned. I've been worried about you. I heard you haven't been going to church. Are you okay? He'd heard I wasn't going to church, which meant he'd been checking up on me, making sure I was still isolated, still broken. I'm fine, honey. Just haven't been feeling well. My hip's been bothering me. Oh. A pause. Well, you should probably see a doctor about that. Yes, I thought. I should see a doctor. I should have the surgery I'd been saving for. The surgery I would have had if you hadn't stolen my money. But I kept my voice light, unconcerned. I will. When I can afford it. Another pause. Longer this time. Listen, Mom. About the money situation. I've been thinking. Maybe we were both under a lot of stress. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. I don't like us being on bad terms. This was it. This was him testing me, seeing if I was still fighting or if I'd given up. I thought about all the things I wanted to say. About the theft, the lies, the way he'd destroyed my reputation. But instead, I said exactly what Thomas had coached me to say. You're right. I think I've been under more stress than I realized. Maybe I did make a mistake about the money. My memory isn't what it used to be. I could almost hear him relax on the other end of the line. Yeah, that's what I thought. Look, maybe we should have dinner sometime. I'll take you somewhere nice. We can talk. That would be lovely, David. I'd like that. Okay. I'll call you next week and we'll set something up. Take care of yourself, Mom. You too, honey. After I hung up, I sat there shaking. I'd done it. I'd convinced him that I'd given up, that I'd accepted his version of reality. But it felt like swallowing poison, admitting fault for his crimes, letting him think he'd won. I called Thomas immediately. He contacted me, just like you said he would. And I think he believes I've given up. He wants to have dinner with me next week. Perfect, Thomas said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. That means he thinks he's safe. Now he'll get careless. People always get careless when they think they've won. Thomas, did you find anything? About his work? I'm still digging, but I did find something interesting. David's been posting a lot on social media lately. Expensive restaurants, a new watch, tickets to sporting events. All in the past 2 months. Someone spending money like that either just got a big bonus or is living well beyond their means. Or spending money he stole from his mother, I said bitterly. Exactly. I'm going to keep following that thread. In the meantime, if he asks you to dinner, say yes. Go with him. Be pleasant. And pay attention to everything he says. Sometimes people reveal more than they realize when they think they're safe. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about how much my life had changed. A month ago, I would have been thrilled that David wanted to have dinner with me, grateful for any attention from my son. Now I was being coached on how to spy on him, how to catch him in his own lies. It wasn't the relationship I'd dreamed of when I first held him as a baby, when I'd looked into his tiny face and promised to love him forever, to protect him from everything that could hurt him. But then, he'd broken his promises too. And unlike me, he'd done it deliberately, knowingly, without remorse. I thought about my father, who'd died when I was 30. He used to say that the hardest part of being a parent wasn't protecting your children from the world. It was accepting who they truly were, even when it broke your heart. I'd never really understood what he meant. I understood now. The dinner invitation came exactly 1 week later, on a Wednesday afternoon. David called while I was sorting through old photographs, pictures of him as a child, smiling at birthday parties, opening Christmas presents, graduating from high school. I'd been looking at these images trying to find some sign, some indication of what he would become. But all I saw was a normal boy, a boy I'd loved with everything I had. "Mom, how about Friday night? There's a nice Italian place downtown. My treat." "That sounds wonderful, David. What time?" "I'll pick you up at 6. Wear something nice." After he hung up, I stared at my closet, at the limited options hanging there. Something nice. Most of my nice clothes were years old, outdated, worn from too many washings. I had one dress that might be appropriate, navy blue, simple, with a cardigan to cover my arms that had gotten so thin lately. I called Thomas. "The dinner is Friday. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can sit across from him and pretend everything is fine." "Yes, you can," Thomas said firmly, "because you're stronger than he thinks you are. Stronger than you think you are. Remember, this isn't about reconciliation. This is about gathering information. Listen to what he says. Watch how he acts. Take mental notes of everything. What if I break down? What if I can't keep up the act?" Then you excuse yourself to the bathroom, take a few deep breaths, and come back. "Marlene, I know this is hard. I know it goes against every instinct you have as a mother. But right now, you need to think like an investigator, not like his mom." Friday came too quickly. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, even though it didn't need cleaning, just to have something to do with my nervous energy. I took a long bath, styled my hair as best I could, put on the navy dress that hung looser than it had the last time I'd worn it. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman trying very hard to look put together when she was actually falling apart inside. But maybe that was enough. Maybe pretending to be okay was the first step toward actually being okay. David arrived exactly at 6, knocking on my door instead of using his key. A small gesture, but I noticed it. He was treating me like a guest in my own life now, maintaining proper boundaries as if we were acquaintances rather than mother and son. He looked good. Too good. His suit was new. I could tell by the way it fit, perfectly tailored to his frame. His shoes were polished to a shine. His watch caught the hallway light, expensive and gleaming. This was what my $3,000 had bought him. The appearance of success. The costume of someone who had money to spare. "You look nice, Mom," he said, smiling. The smile didn't reach his eyes, but it was a good performance. "Thank you, honey. So do you." The drive to the restaurant was filled with small talk. The weather, traffic, a funny story about something that had happened at his office. He was charming, animated, acting like everything between us was completely normal, like he hadn't stolen from me, hadn't called me crazy, hadn't said he wished I wasn't his mother. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place I'd never been able to afford even in my working years. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, servers who moved with quiet efficiency. David ordered wine without asking if I wanted any, chose the expensive bottle, and spoke to the waiter with the easy confidence of someone who ate at places like this regularly. "So," he said after our orders were taken, "how have you been?" "Really?" "Getting by," I said carefully, "taking things one day at a time. I've been worried about you. You seem, I don't know, different lately. More withdrawn, different, withdrawn. As if my isolation was a personality choice rather than the direct result of his systematic destruction of my reputation. I think maybe I just needed some time to myself, I said. To think about things, about getting older, about what comes next. He nodded sympathetically. That's understandable. Getting older is hard. Mom, I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, whatever comes next. I know we had that misunderstanding about the money, but that's behind us now, right? Misunderstanding. He was calling theft a misunderstanding. Right, I said, forcing a smile. That's behind us. The food arrived, pasta dishes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. David ate with obvious enjoyment, talking between bites about his work, about clients he was impressing, about a possible promotion on the horizon. Things are really looking up for me, he said, refilling his wine glass. After a rough patch a few months ago, everything's falling into place. A rough patch. My fingers tightened on my fork. What kind of rough patch? He waved his hand dismissively. Oh, just some office politics. You know how it is. Some people were spreading rumors, trying to make others look bad. But it all worked out. The people who were causing problems are gone now, and the rest of us can focus on doing good work. This was it. This was what Thomas had told me to listen for. David was talking about the investigation at his company, spinning it so he was the victim of office politics rather than potentially one of the people under suspicion. I'm glad it worked out, I said neutrally. That must have been stressful. It was. Really stressful. There were some weeks where I wasn't sure if I'd still have a job. That's actually why I've been so tense lately. Money's been tight, with all the uncertainty. I had to cut back on some expenses, had to be really careful. Money had been tight, he'd been careful with expenses. And yet here we were at an expensive restaurant, and he was wearing a new suit and a watch that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. But you seem to be doing well now, I observed, gesturing at the restaurant. He smiled. Yeah, things turned around. Got some money I wasn't expecting. An investment paid off. So I can afford to treat my mother to a nice dinner, right? An investment. That's what he was calling it. The money he'd stolen from me, the surgery fund I'd spent 2 years building, that was an investment that paid off. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to compose myself before I said something that would ruin the entire evening. In the bathroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. My face was flushed, my eyes bright with unshed tears. You can do this, I whispered to myself. Just a little longer. Just get through dinner. When I returned to the table, David was on his phone, texting someone. He put it away quickly when he saw me. Sorry about that. Just work stuff. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I ate mechanically, responded appropriately to his conversation, laughed at his jokes. I played the role of the grateful mother, the one who was just happy to spend time with her successful son. When the check came, David paid with a credit card, making a show of not even looking at the total. Don't worry about it, Mom. This is my treat. We should do this more often. In the car on the way home, he was relaxed, satisfied. The dinner had accomplished what he'd wanted. It had demonstrated his generosity, his concern, his willingness to maintain a relationship with his difficult, confused mother. It had established the new normal, where he was the benevolent son and I was the elderly parent who needed patience and understanding. When we pulled up in front of my apartment building, he walked me to the door. "I'm really glad we did this, Mom. I think we both needed it. And listen, if you need anything, money for bills, help with groceries, whatever, just let me know. I want to make sure you're taken care of." The audacity of it took my breath away. He was offering to help me with money after stealing everything I had. He was positioning himself as my caretaker, my support system, the good son who looked after his aging mother. Thank you, David. That means a lot. He hugged me before he left, and I forced myself not to stiffen, not to pull away. I hugged him back and told him I loved him, because that's what he needed to hear to believe his performance had worked. The moment my apartment door closed behind me, I collapsed against it, shaking. I'd done it. I'd sat through dinner with the person who'd stolen from me, destroyed my reputation, and told me he wished I wasn't his mother. I'd smiled and laughed and pretended everything was fine. I called Thomas immediately. "How did it go?" "He admitted it," I said, my voice trembling. Not directly, but he admitted it. He talked about having money troubles at work, about money being tight. Then he said he got money from an investment that paid off. Thomas, he called my surgery fund an investment. Did anyone else hear him say this? The waiter? Other diners? I don't think so. The restaurant was quiet and he was speaking normally, not loud enough for others to hear. It's okay. The fact that he said it at all is important. It means he's getting comfortable, letting his guard down. Did he say anything else about the work situation? I told Thomas everything I could remember. The vague references to office politics, the people who were gone now, the stress about keeping his job. Thomas was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Marlene, my contact got back to me yesterday. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. Brennan Financial Group did have an internal investigation. 3 employees were terminated for suspicious activity related to client accounts. David wasn't one of them, but he was questioned. My contact couldn't give me details, but he said David's name came up multiple times during the investigation. My heart was pounding. So he was involved in whatever happened? Possibly. Or at the very least, he knew about it. But here's the thing. If the company was investigating him, even informally, he would have needed money fast. Money for a lawyer if it came to that. Or money to replace funds if he'd borrowed from the wrong place. He needed cash that couldn't be traced. So he stole from me because it was easy, because he knew I wouldn't prosecute my own son. Exactly. And because he knew how to manipulate you into doubting yourself if you did figure it out. Thomas's voice softened. "Marlene, I know this is hard, but we're close. I can feel it. David is getting sloppy, getting comfortable. And that's when people make mistakes." After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment, still wearing the navy dress, still smelling faintly of the expensive Italian restaurant. My hip throbbed. I'd been sitting too long without adjusting my position, too focused on maintaining my performance to notice the pain building. I thought about David's hug, his promises to take care of me, his offer to help with money he'd stolen. I thought about how easily the lies had come to him, how naturally he'd played his role. And I thought about something my mother used to say, back when I was young and naive, and believed that love was enough to fix anything. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we'd do anything to protect. But protection without accountability isn't love, Marlene. It's enabling. I'd been enabling David my whole life. Every time I'd made excuses for him, every time I'd given him money without asking questions, every time I'd defended him against criticism, I'd been teaching him that he could do anything without consequences as long as he was doing it to me. But I wasn't going to enable him anymore. I was done protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. Whatever came next, prosecution, estrangement, public shame, he'd earned it. And I was finally ready to let him face it. I got up from the couch, wincing as my hip protested the movement, and went to my closet. I pulled out the evidence folder from its hiding place and added new notes about the dinner. Every word I could remember, every admission disguised as casual conversation. The folder was getting thicker, and with each page I added, I felt a little less like a victim and a little more like someone who was fighting back. Not with violence or cruelty or revenge, but with truth, with patience, with the quiet, stubborn determination of a woman who'd survived worse than this and refused to simply disappear because it was convenient for someone else. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after the dinner, on a Tuesday morning when I was least expecting it. Thomas called at 8 in the morning, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Marlene, I need you to sit down. I found something." My hands went cold. "What did you find?" "Remember I told you David was questioned during that investigation at his company? I've been digging into public records, court filings, anything that might give us more information. Yesterday, I found a civil lawsuit filed against Brennan Financial Group by a client who claimed someone had made unauthorized withdrawals from her investment account. The lawsuit was settled out of court, sealed records, but the initial filing is public." "And Marlene, the withdrawals happened from the client's account during the same month that David stopped paying your mortgage." I gripped the phone tighter. "Does the lawsuit mention David?" "Not by name, but it mentions that an employee with access to the account is under internal investigation. The timeline matches perfectly. And here's the thing. If David was scrambling to replace money he'd taken from a client account, if he was trying to avoid criminal charges, he'd need cash immediately." Money that couldn't be traced through his bank accounts. "He needed my money to cover up what he'd stolen from someone else," I said slowly, the full picture finally becoming clear. "That's what I think, and there's more. I hired a private investigator, just for a day, nothing we can't afford, to watch David, just to see where he goes, what he does. Marlene, he's been visiting a casino 2 hours from here, multiple times in the past month. That's what gambling debt looks like." That's what desperation looks like. My son was gambling, stealing from clients, stealing from me, and gambling it all away. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now we go to the police with everything we have. Not the local police. They already dismissed your case. We go to the district attorney's office with a complete package." The timeline, the evidence of his financial troubles, the connection to the workplace investigation, the ATM locations near his office, his own admission about the investment at dinner. We present it as a pattern of behavior, not just a one-time theft. "Thomas, what if they still don't believe me? What if David convinces them I'm confused?" Then we go to the media. We go to the state attorney general's office. We go to every single person who turned their back on you and we make them look at the evidence. Marlene, you've been quiet long enough. You've gathered your proof. Now it's time to speak. That afternoon, Thomas drove up again. He'd taken time off work, arranging everything so he could be there with me when we presented our case. We spent hours organizing every piece of evidence, creating a timeline with dates and documentation, preparing a statement that was clear, factual, and impossible to dismiss as the confusion of an elderly woman. The appointment with the district attorney's office was set for Thursday morning. 2 days away. 2 days to prepare, to practice what I would say, to steel myself for what would come next. Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what would happen when the truth finally came out. David would face criminal charges. He might go to jail. His career would be destroyed. Everyone who'd believed him, who'd treated me like I was losing my mind, would know they'd been wrong. Part of me felt sick at the thought. He was still my son. Part of me still wanted to protect him, to shield him from the consequences of his actions. But a stronger part of me, the part that had been growing steadily since Thomas came back into my life, knew that protecting David from consequences hadn't helped him. It had only enabled him to hurt more people, to spiral deeper into whatever darkness had consumed him. Sometimes love means letting people face the truth, even when it destroys them. Thursday morning arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Thomas picked me up at 8:30. I'd dressed carefully, my best clothes, my hair neat, my posture as straight as my painful hip would allow. I wanted to look competent, credible, like someone whose testimony mattered. The district attorney's office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and purposeful efficiency. We were shown into a conference room where a woman in her 40s waited for us, surrounded by files and a laptop. Her name was Sarah Morrison, no relation, and she was an assistant district attorney who specialized in financial crimes. She shook my hand firmly, her grip strong and professional. "Mrs. Chen, please sit down. I've reviewed the preliminary information your brother sent over. I'd like to hear your full statement, and then we'll go through the evidence together." For the next 2 hours, I told my story. Every detail, every conversation, every piece of documentation. Sarah Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Her face remained neutral throughout, giving nothing away. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Chen," she finally said, "I'm going to be honest with you. If you'd come to us with just the missing cash and your son's denial, we wouldn't have been able to pursue charges." It would have been your word against his, and the confused elderly mother defense would have been difficult to overcome. But what you've brought me today is different. This is a pattern. This is documentation. This is evidence of motive and opportunity. This is a case I can prosecute. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it made me dizzy. "So you believe me?" "Mrs. Chen, it's not about belief. It's about evidence. And you have it. More than that, your son's connection to the investigation at Brennan Financial Group opens up additional avenues. If he was stealing from clients and from you to cover his tracks, this becomes a much larger case. We'll need to coordinate with the Financial Crimes Unit, possibly with federal investigators if client funds were involved." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "I want you to understand what comes next. We'll be filing charges. Your son will be arrested. This will become public. The people who doubted you will know they were wrong, but that also means everyone will know your private business. Your relationship with your son will likely be permanently damaged. Are you prepared for that? I thought about David's face when he'd said he wished I wasn't his mother. I thought about sitting alone in my apartment, abandoned by everyone I knew, wondering if I really was losing my mind. I thought about the surgery I might never be able to afford, the pain that had become my constant companion. I'm prepared, I said. What he did was wrong. Not just to me, to others. If I stay quiet, if I protect him, he'll just do it again to someone else. Sarah Morrison nodded. Then we move forward. I'll need you to sign some documents, give an official statement. The process will take a few weeks to build the complete case. But Mrs. Chen, this is happening. Your son is going to face justice for what he did. We left the district attorney's office 3 hours after we'd arrived. In the car, Thomas reached over and squeezed my hand. You did it, he said. You really did it. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. It would have been harder, and it would have taken longer. But you would have found a way. You're stronger than you think, Marlene. Stronger than David ever gave you credit for. The arrest happened on a Monday morning, 2 weeks later. I wasn't there to see it. Sarah Morrison had advised me to stay away, to let the process unfold without my direct involvement. But Thomas was with me when the call came through. It's done, Sarah said. David Chen has been arrested and charged with theft, elder financial abuse, and fraud. He's being processed now. His bail hearing is this afternoon. After I hung up, I sat very still. It was done. After months of pain and isolation and doubt, after being called crazy and confused and paranoid, after losing everything, it was finally done. How do you feel? Thomas asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. Relieved, sad, angry, guilty, all of it at once. That's normal. He's still your son. You're allowed to grieve what you thought your relationship was, even while you pursue justice for what he actually did. The news spread quickly. By that evening, my phone was ringing constantly. Numbers I recognized and numbers I didn't. I let most calls go to voicemail, but I listened to the messages later. Susan, my neighbor. Marlene, I saw the news. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have listened. Martha from church. Marlene, please call me back. We need to talk. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Pastor Edwards. Marlene, I owe you an apology. The church owes you an apology. Please let us make this right. Even Officer Martinez called. Mrs. Chen, I wanted you to know that we're reopening our investigation in light of the new charges. I apologize for not pursuing this more thoroughly the first time. You deserved better from us. Every apology felt hollow. Where were these people when I'd needed them? When I'd been sitting alone in my apartment, wondering if I was losing my mind? When I'd been eating one meal a day because I couldn't afford more? When my own community had turned its back on me? But I also understood something I hadn't before. David hadn't just fooled them. He'd been trained by me to be believable. I'd spent 32 years teaching him that his mother would always forgive him, always protect him, always choose him over herself. And he'd used those lessons to destroy me. They were wrong to abandon me. But I'd been wrong to enable him. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Sarah Morrison called to prepare me for what to expect. David's lawyer would try to discredit me, would bring up my age, would suggest I was confused or vindictive. But she assured me that the evidence was strong, that my testimony was just one part of a much larger case. Mrs. Chen, she said. I also want you to know that we've been contacted by 2 other clients of Brennan Financial Group. After news of your son's arrest became public, they came forward with suspicions about their own accounts. We're investigating those claims now. Your willingness to speak up may have helped protect others from becoming victims. That information changed something in me. I wasn't just seeking justice for myself anymore. I was part of something larger, something that mattered beyond my own pain. The night before the hearing, I went through my closet looking for something appropriate to wear. My navy dress, the one I'd worn to dinner with David, hung there like a ghost. I couldn't wear that. It carried too many memories of that terrible evening, of pretending everything was fine while my son bragged about his investment. Instead, I chose a simple gray suit I'd bought years ago for a funeral. It seemed fitting somehow. I was mourning too, in my way. Mourning the son I'd thought I had, the relationship I'd believed we shared. Thomas stayed at my apartment that night, sleeping on the couch again despite my protests. You shouldn't be alone tonight, he said firmly. Tomorrow is going to be hard. You need family with you. Family. The word meant something different now than it had 6 months ago. Family wasn't just blood. It was the people who showed up, who believed you, who stood beside you when everything fell apart. Thomas was family. Sarah Morrison, who was fighting for justice on my behalf, was family in a way. Even Claire, the nurse from months ago who'd set this all in motion by believing me when no one else did. She was family. David, my son, the child I'd carried and raised and sacrificed everything for. He'd proven that blood alone wasn't enough to make someone family. That night, I dreamed of David as a little boy. He was maybe 5 years old, running through a park, laughing, calling for me to watch him on the swings. In the dream, I could still protect him. I could still keep him safe from the world, from his own worst impulses, from the man he would become. But when I woke up, reality settled back over me like a heavy blanket. The little boy in my dream was gone. In his place was a man who'd stolen from me, lied about me, and shown no remorse for any of it. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, I would face him. And for the first time in his life, I would not be there to protect him. I would be there to tell the truth. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from watching television shows. The wooden benches, the judge's elevated platform, the tables where lawyers sat with their clients. It all felt both more intimate and more intimidating than I'd expected. This was where truth would be weighed, where justice would be determined, where my word would finally matter. Thomas sat beside me in the gallery, his presence steady and grounding. Sarah Morrison stood at the prosecution table, organizing her files with calm efficiency, and at the defense table, with his back to me, sat David. I hadn't seen him since our dinner together, that terrible performance where I'd pretended to believe his lies. Now, seeing the back of his head, the set of his shoulders in his expensive suit, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not even sadness, just a quiet, clear certainty that I was doing the right thing. When David finally turned around, our eyes met across the courtroom. I expected anger, defiance, maybe even hatred. But what I saw was something different. Fear. Real, genuine fear. For perhaps the first time in his life, David was facing consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. He looked away first. The preliminary hearing proceeded with formal efficiency. Sarah Morrison presented the evidence: bank records, ATM footage, documentation of David's questioning during the Brennan Financial Group investigation, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen him entering my apartment on the day the cash went missing. She presented the timeline, showing how his mortgage payments to my house had stopped the same month as the suspicious activity at his workplace. Then she called me to testify. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Every step required conscious effort, deliberate movement. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The chair was hard, uncomfortable, designed perhaps to keep witnesses alert and focused. Sarah Morrison approached with a gentle expression. "Mrs. Chen, can you tell us about your relationship with your son, David Chen?" I took a breath. I raised him alone from the time he was 10 years old. His father left, and it was just the two of us. I worked 2 jobs to support him, to make sure he had everything he needed. I thought we were close. I thought he loved me the way I loved him. And when did that perception change? When I discovered that $3,000 I'd been saving for surgery was missing from my home. David was the only other person with a key. When I asked him about it, he denied taking it. He said I was confused, that I was losing my memory. He convinced everyone, my neighbors, my church, my friends, that I was mentally declining and making false accusations. My voice remained steady. I'd practiced this, prepared for this moment. But more than that, I was simply telling the truth, and the truth had its own weight, its own power. Did your son ever admit to taking the money? Not directly. But at dinner several weeks ago, he told me he'd been having financial troubles at work, that money had been tight. Then he said he'd gotten money from an investment that had paid off. He was wearing new clothes, an expensive watch, taking me to expensive restaurants, all while claiming he'd been struggling financially. Sarah Morrison nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor." David's lawyer stood up, a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd seen every courtroom drama imaginable and was unimpressed by all of them. "Mrs. Chen," he began, his voice carrying just a hint of condescension. "You're 73 years old, correct?" "Yes." "And you live alone, on a fixed income?" "Yes." "Isn't it true that you've had some difficulties with your memory? That you sometimes forget where you've placed things?" I saw where this was going. This was David's defense: paint me as a confused elderly woman who couldn't be trusted to remember her own actions. "I sometimes forget where I put my reading glasses," I said clearly. "I don't forget spending $3,000. I don't forget 2 years of saving $5 and $10 at a time. I don't forget the surgery I've been dreaming about, the relief from pain I've been working toward." "But you admit your memory isn't perfect?" "No one's memory is perfect, sir." "But my memory of what my son did to me is absolutely clear." The lawyer shifted tactics. "Isn't it true that you and your son had a disagreement about his lifestyle? That you disapproved of his spending habits?" "I never disapproved of how David spent his own money," I said. "I disapproved of him spending mine." A few people in the gallery, reporters mostly, who'd come to cover the hearing, made small sounds. Not quite laughter, but acknowledgement. The lawyer pressed on for another 20 minutes, trying different approaches, attempting to discredit my testimony. But Sarah Morrison had prepared me well, and more importantly, I had the truth on my side. Every answer I gave was simple, direct, and honest. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, my hip was throbbing from sitting in one position too long, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd done it. I'd told the truth in a place where the truth mattered, where it would be recorded and weighed and acted upon. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the evidence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, I'm finding probable cause to move forward with prosecution. Mr. Chen, you are hereby bound over for trial on charges of theft, elder financial abuse, and fraud. Bail is set at $50,000. $50,000. I saw David's face go pale. I wondered if he had that kind of money, or if his gambling and spending had consumed everything. As we left the courtroom, reporters approached, asking for comments. Thomas shielded me, guiding me through the crowd, but I stopped for just a moment. I want people to know, I said, my voice quiet but carrying, that elder abuse isn't always physical. It isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's your own child, someone you trust completely, taking advantage of that trust. And when it happens, people don't believe you because how could a son do that to his own mother? But it happens. It's happening to someone right now. And I want them to know they're not crazy, they're not confused, and they deserve justice. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of activity. The story made the news. Local woman fights back against son's theft, read one headline. Elder financial abuse case highlights growing problem, read another. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, which I declined. I'd said what I needed to say in that courtroom. The rest was between David, the justice system, and whatever conscience he might still possess. But something else happened, too. People started reaching out. Not to apologize, though many did that too, but to share their own stories. An elderly man whose daughter had stolen his retirement. A woman whose son had forged her signature on loan documents. A widower whose caregiver had been systematically draining his accounts. Elder abuse was everywhere, hiding in plain sight, enabled by the shame victims felt and the disbelief they encountered when they tried to speak up. Sarah Morrison called 2 months after the preliminary hearing. Mrs. Chen, I wanted you to know that David has accepted a plea deal. He'll plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution. He'll also be required to complete a gambling addiction treatment program and financial counseling. Restitution, I repeated. Does that mean? Yes. He'll be required to pay back the $3,000 he stole from you, plus the mortgage payments he failed to make. It won't happen all at once. He'll be making monthly payments during his probation, but you'll get your money back eventually. Eventually. It wasn't the same as having it now, when I needed the surgery most, but it was something. More than that, it was acknowledgement. Legal, official recognition that what David had done was wrong, that I hadn't been confused or mistaken, that I'd been the victim of a crime. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her voice softening. David asked if he could write you a letter. He doesn't expect a response, and I've made it clear that any attempt to contact you directly would violate his bail conditions. But he wrote something he wanted you to have. I have it in my office if you'd like to pick it up. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I'll pick it up, I finally said. But I'm not promising I'll read it. The letter sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. Thomas had offered to read it first, to shield me from whatever poison it might contain. But this was something I needed to do alone. When I finally unfolded the pages, David's handwriting, familiar from birthday cards and Mother's Day notes from years ago, stared back at me. "Mom," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I understand now what I did to you. Not just the theft, but everything that came before it. All the times I took advantage of your love, your willingness to sacrifice, your need to believe the best of me. I used those things as weapons against you. I convinced myself I deserved whatever I could take because of everything you'd given me. But that was a lie. It was always a lie." The letter went on for 3 pages. He explained about the gambling, how it had started as stress relief and spiraled into addiction. He explained about the investigation at work, how he'd been questioned about missing client funds, how he'd panicked and taken money from wherever he could get it. He explained how he'd convinced himself that stealing from me wasn't really stealing because I was his mother and mothers were supposed to help their children. But what struck me most was the ending. "I wish I could go back and be the son you deserved, the son you tried to raise. But I can't." All I can do is face what I've done, accept the consequences, and try to become someone who might eventually deserve the gift of having been your son. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know that you were right. About everything. And I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt you. Because I destroyed something precious that I can never get back. I'm so sorry. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it away. I didn't know if I believed David's remorse was genuine, or if this was just another manipulation, another performance designed to make him look sympathetic. Maybe time would tell. Maybe it wouldn't matter. What mattered was that I'd survived. I'd fought back. I'd demanded justice and received it. A week later, I had an unexpected visitor. Pastor Edwards came to my apartment, hat in hand, literally. He stood at my door holding his baseball cap and looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. "Marlene," he said, "I owe you more than an apology, but an apology is where I need to start. I failed you, not just as your pastor, but as someone who should have known you well enough to trust your word over someone else's manipulation. I chose the easy narrative, that you were declining, instead of asking harder questions." I invited him in, made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table. "The church wants to make things right," he continued. "We've set up a fund to help cover your surgery costs. Several members have contributed, and we've also organized volunteers to help with transportation to appointments, meals after your surgery, whatever you need. It's not enough, I know, but it's something." "Why now?" I asked, not unkindly. "Why not when I needed you most?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because we were cowards. We took the path of least resistance. It was easier to believe David than to face the uncomfortable possibility that we'd all been fooled, that we'd abandoned someone who needed us. Marlene, I can't change what we did, but I can try to do better going forward." Over the following weeks, others came too. Martha, Joyce, Carol. The church women who'd been my friends for years. Susan, my neighbor. They came with apologies, with offers of help, with shame written plainly on their faces. I accepted their apologies, but I also told them the truth. What hurt most wasn't that you believed David. It was that you didn't even question it. You didn't ask me for my side, didn't consider that I might be telling the truth. You saw an elderly woman and automatically assumed confusion. That's something you all need to think about. How quickly you dismissed me, how easily you wrote me off. Some of them got defensive, some of them cried. But some of them listened, really listened, and I saw understanding dawn in their eyes. The surgery happened 4 months after the preliminary hearing. The church fund, combined with what David had started paying back, was enough to cover most of the costs. Thomas drove me to the hospital and stayed with me through the whole process. The recovery was hard. Weeks of physical therapy, pain that sometimes felt worse than before the surgery. But slowly, gradually, I began to walk without constant agony. I could stand for more than a few minutes. I could go for walks in the park I'd avoided for years because every step had been torture. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything had fallen apart and begun to rebuild itself, I was sitting on a park bench, watching children play, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Chen, this is Angela Torres." "I'm one of the clients of Brennan Financial Group who came forward after your son's arrest. I just wanted to thank you. Your willingness to prosecute gave me the courage to investigate my own accounts. It turns out David had been skimming from my retirement fund for 8 months. Because of your case, I was able to get restitution too. I got my money back." After we hung up, I sat there on that bench and cried, not from sadness, but from a strange, overwhelming sense of purpose. My pain had meant something. My fight had protected others. The worst experience of my life had somehow become a force for good in the world. Thomas called that evening. "How are you feeling? How's the hip?" "Better," I said. "Actually better. I walked half a mile today without stopping." "That's wonderful, Marlene." There was a pause. "I want to ask you something. What are you going to do now? I mean, you've gotten justice. You're healing physically. You have your community back, sort of. What comes next for you?" It was a question I'd been asking myself. For so long, my life had been defined by raising David, then by working to support us, then by the trauma of what he'd done. Who was I now, without any of that? "I think," I said slowly, "I might volunteer at the senior center, talk to people about financial abuse, about recognizing the signs, maybe help others who are going through what I went through. I don't want to be bitter. I don't want this experience to make me smaller. I want it to make me useful." "That sounds like you," Thomas said warmly. "That sounds exactly like you." David was sentenced 3 weeks later. I attended the hearing, not to gloat or to see him suffer, but because I needed to close this chapter completely. I needed to see it through to the end. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up. My hip barely protested the movement, a small miracle I didn't take for granted. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "my son stole money from me. He stole my dignity, my reputation, and my faith in people I'd known for years. But more than that, he stole time. Time I spent in pain because I couldn't afford surgery. Time I spent isolated and alone because no one believed me. Time I'll never get back. I want him to know that those things have consequences, not just legal consequences, but human ones. He hurt someone who loved him more than anything in the world. And that's something he'll have to live with for the rest of his life." I sat down. David was crying, his shoulders shaking. I didn't know if the tears were real or performative. I didn't know if he truly understood what he'd done or if he just regretted getting caught. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd said what I needed to say. The rest was his journey to make. A year later, I was leading a support group at the Senior Center for Victims of Elder Financial Abuse. Eight people sat in a circle with me, sharing their stories, supporting each other. I recognized the pain in their faces, the shame, the self-doubt, the fear that no one would believe them. "What you're feeling is normal," I told them. "What happened to you is real. You're not confused, you're not making it up, and you deserve justice. And more than that, You deserve to know that what happened doesn't define you. You're more than what was done to you. After the meeting, a woman in her 80s approached me. "Thank you," she said simply. "My daughter has been taking my Social Security checks. I thought I was imagining it. But hearing your story, hearing that you fought back and won, it gives me hope." Hope. That's what I'd been searching for in my darkest days. That's what Thomas had given me when he believed me. That's what I could give to others now. I still think about David sometimes. I wonder if he's learned anything, if prison has changed him, if he feels genuine remorse or just anger at being caught. I wonder if I'll ever be able to look at him without seeing both the little boy who brought me dandelions and the man who destroyed my life. But I've learned something important through all of this. Love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting consequences. Being a mother doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of your child's needs. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the truth of their actions. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is survive when everyone expects you to break. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up, even when your voice shakes, even when no one wants to listen. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. That family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when you need them. That justice, even when it comes slowly, is worth fighting for. That pain can be transformed into purpose. That endings can become beginnings. And I learned that even at 73 years old, even after losing almost everything, I could still become someone I was proud to be. My name is Marlene Chen. My son betrayed me, stole from me, and tried to destroy me. But I survived. I fought back. I won. And if you're out there listening, going through something similar, wondering if it's worth the fight, it is. You are worth fighting for. Your truth matters. Your pain is real. And you are so much stronger than you know. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, if it helped you, please leave a comment. Tell me what city you're listening from. Tell me if you've experienced something similar. Let's support each other. Let's be the family that shows up when it matters. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be broken. Sometimes survival itself is victory. Sometimes speaking your truth is the bravest act of all.